Welcome to the MarketRent Weekly Brief, your go-to source for the latest insights and updates in the real estate market. Each week, we'll bring you the most important news and trends to help you stay informed and make smart decisions. Let's dive into this week's episode.
All right, so we're diving into a pretty fascinating shift happening in residential living. Specifically when we're looking at those 55 and over,
Right.
we're seeing this growing interest and really appeal of what are called active adult communities.
Yeah.
And why they're becoming kind of the preferred choice over the traditional multifamily options that we might think of, or even those kind of older conventional ideas of senior housing.
Exactly.
So we're talking about a big change here.
Yeah, a real evolution in how we think about this.
Right. And you, the listener, are here to get a clear understanding of what's happening without, getting bogged down in all the little details.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into it. What kind of information have we gathered that's going to paint this picture for us?
Well, we've pulled together a lot from recent analyses of real estate trends, a lot of industry reports that are really focused on this specific sector. It's dynamic, it's changing.
Right.
And what we want to do is really get to those core insights, what's driving the success of these 55 and over communities.
Yeah.
What makes them stand out in this landscape?
Okay, cool. So let's unpack this a little bit.
Right.
When we hear that phrase senior housing, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us might still picture, facilities that are really focused on healthcare.
Right. A very medical model.
Right. But it seems like the reality is that image is really changing.
It's a pretty dramatic shift.
Okay.
What we're seeing with the active adult community today is really different.
Okay.
It's not primarily about medical assistance. It's really rooted in promoting an independent
Right.
and a very vibrant lifestyle. In
Oh.
fact, you see people moving in their early 60s, not because they have to,
Right.
but because they want to.
Right.
They're actively embracing the lifestyle, the social connections
Right.
that these communities offer.
It's a choice.
Very much so.
It's a proactive choice.
It is.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is a fundamental change.
It is. And it seems like there's some really strong demographic shifts that are kind of pushing this forward, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, the baby boomer generation is huge.
Right.
They have considerable financial resources.
Okay.
And their preferences are really driving a lot of this.
Okay.
They want independent living,
Yeah.
but they want it with amenities.
Okay.
And the data really bears this out.
Okay.
In early 2024, occupancy rates in active adult communities hit 92.6%.
Wow.
Now, to give you a comparison, traditional senior housing in the same period was only at 86.1%.
Oh, wow.
So you see right there, the demand is...
It's a big difference.
It is a significant difference, yeah.
Okay. So developers are seeing this, right?
They're taking note, absolutely.
Yeah. Are they responding to this?
Yeah, they are. Between 2020 and 2022, nearly 25,000 new active adult units
Wow.
were brought online across the country.
Okay.
And then you look at the bigger picture, right? The growth in the 80-plus population is now exceeding the rate
Right.
at which we're bringing new inventory online.
I see.
So that creates a really favorable environment for both investors and developers looking at this sector.
Higher demand than supply.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And I seem to recall that there were some pretty big numbers in terms of the investment that's happening in this space.
Yeah, the resurgence in investment activity is remarkable.
Okay.
Sales of senior housing properties hit $5.5 billion in 2024.
Wow.
That's up from $3.5 billion in 2023.
Okay.
So that significant increase, that really highlights the confidence that investors have
Yeah. Yeah.
in this market.
Huge confidence.
Yeah.
Okay. So we see that the demand's there.
Right.
The development is responding to that demand.
Yeah.
But what is it that's making these communities so appealing to residents?
Yeah. It's got to be more than just you can only live here if you're over 55.
Right. Exactly what's going on.
You're right. Amenities are key.
Okay.
And the competition among developers is really pushing this innovation in what's being offered.
Right.
What might have been considered, a premium a few years ago is now just kind of what's expected.
Okay.
You think about community gardens.
Right.
It's not just about, growing things.
Right.
It's about social interaction,
Right.
purpose, and retirement.
Okay, so what kind of things are we seeing? What are these amenities that are really capturing people's attention?
So think about fitness centers that are specifically designed for this age group.
Okay.
Low impact equipment.
Right.
Aquatic facilities are huge zero entry heated pools.
Right.
Movement studios for things like yoga and Tai Chi.
Okay.
And it's not just about the physical.
Yeah.
You have wellness spaces now with saunas and therapy rooms.
Okay.
Then you've got shift-driven cafes,
Right.
healthy menu choices,
Okay.
pet-friendly areas, dog parks, washing stations for your dog,
Right.
lifelong learning libraries, tech labs, creative studios,
Yeah.
and then the enhanced transportation options,
Sure.
providing that independence.
Wow, this is really sounding less like a place to live and more like a lifestyle destination.
In many ways it is, and it's meant to be. You know, it's meant to cultivate an active and engaged and healthy lifestyle,
Right. Yeah.
foster that sense of community and belonging,
Right.
which the data tells us is a big priority for this demographic.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's where it gets even more interesting.
Right.
It's not just about attracting these residents. There's a business case
Right.
for focusing on this market. Is there?
There is, you know, these communities tend to have higher occupancy rates,
Oh.
lower turnover compared to your typical multifamily properties.
Right.
Residents stay longer,
Okay.
especially in places that are doing it well.
Okay.
And that translates into more predictable income streams for investors.
Right. That stability is really attractive.
It is. And then you add to that, you know, the fact that the baby boomer generation holds so much wealth.
Right.
We're talking 52% of the country's net worth. That's something like $75 trillion.
Right.
So the economic potential here is huge.
It's massive.
It is. And you see that, you know, reflected in what's happening with big institutional investors. Yeah.
Morgan Stanley, for example.
Right.
Their $315 million acquisition in 2024.
Wow.
That shows you that they see viability in
Yeah.
this sector.
Okay, so you mentioned Morgan Stanley making a big acquisition. You know, that certainly signals, you know, a belief in the future of this.
Right.
But, you know, is this just limited to the higher end of the market?
Right.
What about folks who may not be able to, you know, afford those luxury options?
That's such a critical question.
Yeah.
Because the middle market in senior housing
Right.
is a huge opportunity. And so often it's underserved.
Right.
By 2033, it's projected that middle-income seniors are going to make up about 44%
Okay.
of all the older adult households in the U.S.
Wow.
And they're frequently left with, you know, inadequate choices.
Right.
So you can imagine, you know, someone who's got a modest retirement income,
Right.
they don't qualify for subsidized housing,
Right.
but they can't afford, you know, the high rents of these luxury communities.
Right.
That's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a big challenge. So how do we tap into that?
Yeah.
What are the approaches?
Well, there's a couple of promising strategies.
Okay.
One that we talk about a lot is adaptive reuse of existing buildings.
Okay.
Things like underutilized hotels, office buildings, retail spaces.
Right.
This can be a much more cost-effective way to develop
Okay.
than new construction.
Okay.
Other strategies, you know, you can look at smaller unit sizes,
Right.
but still have those great shared amenities,
Right.
really efficient staffing models.
Okay.
You know, thinking about forming strategic partnerships with healthcare providers.
Right.
Rather than providing extensive on-site medical services.
Okay.
Then it's something called value-engineered construction.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. What is value engineered construction?
Sure. So essentially, it's about finding smart ways to build PSE
Okay.
using cost-effective materials,
Okay.
designs,
Right.
but without compromising the quality and the safety and the functionality
Okay.
of the community and the amenities. Right. It's about making intelligent choices in that construction process
Right.
so that you're optimizing value for both the developer and ultimately the resident.
Right.
You're keeping the costs manageable.
Right. Okay, so you're not sacrificing what's important,
Exactly.
but you're doing it in a way that
Yes.
makes sense financially.
Right.
Okay, so now are these trends and preferences the same everywhere in the country,
Right.
or do we see some regional differences?
Oh, there are definitely regional variations.
Okay.
You know, amenities are often tailored to the local climate, the lifestyle,
Makes sense.
you know, warmer climates,
Right.
more emphasis on outdoor living spaces, multiple pools,
Right.
outdoor recreation,
Okay.
colder regions.
Right.
You're going to see things like enclosed walking paths,
Yeah.
heated parking garages,
Right.
urban developments, rooftop lounges, those compact high-end fitness studios,
Okay.
where space is at a premium.
Makes sense.
Suburban properties, you've got more expansive grounds for those gardens and the dog parks.
Right. So really tailoring it to the specific needs of
Exactly.
that region.
Exactly. Catering to that environment and that lifestyle.
Okay. Cool. What other future trends are we seeing that are kind of shaping this sector?
Well, health technology is being integrated more and more.
Okay.
Telehealth infrastructure, wearable devices
All right.
to really support personalized wellness and care.
Interesting.
Sustainability is also becoming a huge factor.
Okay.
Solar panels, energy efficient systems are more and more common.
Right.
We're seeing the emergence of these multi-generational spaces
Okay.
in some communities,
Interesting.
which really reflects that desire for those intergenerational connections.
Yeah.
And I think a big trend is the personalization of services
Right.
and amenity options so that you can cater to individual preferences
Right.
and really enhance the appeal and the accessibility
Right.
of these communities, particularly in that middle market.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned adaptive reuse as a really important strategy.
Yes.
Especially for that middle market. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit more for us?
Sure. So adaptive reuse is a compelling way to address that need for senior housing in the middle market.
Okay.
Because it offers a path to more cost-effective development.
Okay.
You repurpose existing structures.
Right.
You can reduce those upfront capital expenditures.
Okay.
Shorten project timelines.
Right.
Compared to ground-up construction.
Right.
And those cost savings
Yeah.
can then be passed on to the residents in the form of lower rents.
Right. So it makes it much more accessible.
It does. It makes
Yeah.
that amenity-rich, active adult living a possibility for a much broader range of seniors
Right.
who might not have been able to afford it otherwise.
Right. Okay. So let's bring it all together.
Yeah.
We've seen a very clear shift towards these amenity-rich, active adult communities
Yeah.
driven by the baby boomers.
Yeah. Their preferences, their purchasing power are really shaping this.
And this has created a really strong investment landscape
It has.
with a huge opportunity in that middle market.
Yeah.
Where adaptive reuse is really proving to be a key.
Absolutely. A key to unlocking that potential.
Okay.
And I think the really fundamental shift is that we've moved away from just thinking about healthcare
Right.
to actively supporting a vibrant and independent lifestyle.
Right.
And the data really shows that that model is succeeding.
It's working. This has been so insightful.
Yeah.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener out there.
Right.
Especially if you're involved in multifamily development, ownership, property management.
Yeah.
What are some innovative approaches to your existing properties that you could be thinking about right now to really capitalize on this growing senior demographic
Right.
and their desire for vibrant, independent living? This is a market that is just brimming with opportunity.
It is for those who are ready to adapt and innovate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks for
Thanks for joining me.
It was a pleasure.
All right.
That's it for this week's edition of the Market Rent Weekly Brief. To access more insights and resources, visit marketrent.us. Thank you for listening. To learn more about how Clarendon can help you achieve your real estate goals, please visit us online. We appreciate your trust in us as your go-to source for market intelligence. Our goal is to equip you with the critical insights and data necessary to make informed decisions. Until next time, stay informed and stay ahead.